Hello, everyone, and welcome to another grammar clinic session. As you probably already know, my name is Kieran, and today I'm going to be talking to you about embedded clauses. And these are going to help you construct richer, more complex sentences. Okay? So, this is connected to the idea of cohesion and cohesive devices, which we have talked about recently. So, if you haven't checked out those videos, then I suggest you do now. There should be a link here on the screen for you. Okay. So, if you don't already know, embedded clauses are those clauses, those parts of a sentence that allow us to add depth, detail, and precision to our writing. So instead of relying on those short, simple sentences placed one after another, we can build sentences that flow smoothly and communicate ideas more elegantly. So these are going to be super useful for any assignments you have at higher education. So throughout this session, we're going to examine some examples, we're going to practice identifying some embedded clauses, and most importantly, we're going to learn how to add them to your own writing. So let's begin with a quick discussion. This is going to introduce the ideas of embedded clauses in a natural sense. So, bit of a strange question, but think about dumplings for a moment. Have you ever made them? Have you ever eaten them? And if so, what ingredients did you use or what flavors do you remember? Um, Dumplings are a great example to work with because the process of making them involves several steps, and describing that process often requires more detail than a simple sentence can provide. So that is where embedded clauses become incredibly useful. So consider dumplings for a second. Hopefully you don't get too hungry that you have to run out and make some food for yourself. But if you're still with me, well, let's move on to our next slide. So today we've got two main learning goals. So first, we will understand what embedded clauses are and how they function to elaborate, to extend, and explain ideas within a sentence. Second, you will learn how to apply embedded clauses in your own writing so you can build more complex and expressive sentences. So by the end of this lesson, hopefully, you will feel far more confident identifying and most importantly, using them effectively. Okay? So we're going to be mentioning clauses throughout the rest of this presentation. So consider here what a clause actually is. It is a group of words with a subject and a predicate, usually a verb, that can form part of a sentence. All right? So a clause can be something super small, like I jumped. We've got a subject, I, we've got a predicate, jumped, that's a clause. Okay. But it's very, very small. So normally, well, not normally, like a lot of the time, sentences are made up of one, two, three clauses. Okay. And we're going to be looking at specific types of clauses today, which are those embedded ones. So let's go back to that idea of dumplings. So we've got here two versions of a text about making dumplings. So before analyzing them, take a moment to look at both and ask yourself, which version gives more detailed information? Which one feels richer, more descriptive, more vivid? Notice how the structure of the sentences affects how much information each text can communicate. Text A presents information in very short, simple sentences. Each sentence tells us what happens, but it doesn't give us much depth. We know the steps, but not much more than that. I mean, this approach isn't wrong, but it does limit the amount of detail the writer can include. It can also make the writing feel repetitive, choppy, because the ideas are presented in separate units without any elaboration, extension, etc. Text B, on the other hand, provides a far more detailed and also, consequently, engaging description. So here we learn not only what is happening, but also how the actions are carried out, what the ingredients are like, and how the process feels. So the sentences are longer and more fluid because they contain embedded clauses. These embedded clauses add some explanation, some context, some sensory detail, which makes the text much more vivid and alive. So text B sounds richer because it specifically has these embedded clauses. The writer can include additional detail without breaking up the flow of the sentence. Instead of writing several simple sentences in a list, the writer weaves information together so the reader receives a fuller picture. So, embedded clauses help us explain more, describe more, and express ideas in a more sophisticated way. So here, you can see the embedded clauses clearly marked from text B. So look at phrases such as where we mix finely ground meat and which is rolled out thinly. Each of these clauses adds essential detail and helps the reader understand the process more clearly. Embedded clauses sit inside the main sentence like small pockets of information, enriching the meaning and allowing us to pack more detail into a single thought. Okay. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. So an embedded clause is a group of words that sits within the main sentence and gives some extra information. It doesn't replace the main idea. Instead, it expands on it. Think of it as a small descriptive packet inside the much larger, bigger sentence. So, for example, in the sentence, making dumplings, a traditional dish in many cultures, is a very enjoyable task. The phrase, a traditional dish in many cultures, adds some important background information without interrupting the sentence structure as it is. So we still know it is a very enjoyable task, but we've added in some extra detail. So, how can you identify an embedded clause? Well, it's a good question. So one useful clue is to look for certain words that commonly introduce embedded clauses. These include relative pronouns like which, that, who, and conjunctions such as when, where, because, although, and if. These words often signal that extra information is about to be added inside the sentence. So let's have a look at some more examples. So in this sentence here, the dumpling dough, if it's soft, will allow the cooked dumplings to be tender. The embedded clause is if it's soft. It gives additional information about the dough. Okay, it provides like a conditional situation. In the other example, the dumpling dough that I made yesterday had to be rolled thinly. So we've got the embedded clause here that I made yesterday, which adds context about when the dough was actually prepared. Like you see, it's not completely essential, but it provides some extra detail. It provides the context. So both embedded clauses here provide useful information that enriches the main sentence. So I've spotted those embedded clauses for you. Now it is time for you to do that. So read the sentence on the next slide and try to identify the section of words that is adding extra information. So remember, an embedded clause sits inside the main sentence and elaborates on a specific part of it. Look for the portion that you could remove without breaking the sentence, but still it adds helpful detail. Okay, so the first one here on the screen. After mixing the ingredients, which include minced meat and vegetables, you can start shaping the dumplings. Where is our embedded clause here? Well, it is this one, which include minced meat and vegetables. It's introduced by the word which, and it tells us much more about the ingredients. If you remove it, the sentence still makes sense, but it is much less informative. With the embedded clause included, the sentence becomes richer and more specific. Another example here, so the filling, which is usually seasoned with various spices, gives the dumplings their delicious flavor. Where is the embedded clause? Okay. It is this part here, which is usually seasoned with various spices. It describes the filling in more detail and gives us insight into what helps create the dumpling's flavor. Without it, the sentence would still work, but it wouldn't be as descriptive. So now we're going to shift from identifying embedded clauses to actually creating them. So your task is to think of an embedded clause that you could use and fit in logically into the sentences that we are going to provide. So the goal is to add more information in a natural way, enhancing the sentences while maintaining a clear structure. So think about what extra detail might be useful for the reader to know. All right, so we got here, fold the dumplings in half and pinch the edges. So what extra detail could you add in there? Okay, remember your embedded clause needs to provide some meaning relevant information. So I'm sure you're all shouting at the screen, telling me your answers here. Let's have a look at one example. So in this version, the embedded clause it added is as you seal the delicious filling within the wrappers. So this clause helps explain what is happening during the folding and pinching process. It adds a little bit of clarity, a little bit of description, and makes the sentence more engaging. Another example here, steam the dumplings for about 15 minutes. We've got a simple sentence, but we want to make it more descriptive by adding extra information. So maybe think about time, any sensory details, or maybe a bit of the process, anything that could expand the meaning. Okay, so shout at the screen again, tell me what you're thinking. So in this completed sentence here, our example sentence, the embedded clause is until they become soft and fully cooked inside. So this addition explains what we are waiting for while the dumplings steam. It also clarifies the purpose of the time mentioned. The sentence becomes much more precise, and it gives the reader the opportunity to understand exactly what the cooking process aims to achieve. So, to summarize, embedded clauses are groups of words inserted into a main sentence to provide additional detail. They help expand and clarify meaning, and they make writing much more sophisticated. Instead of relying on several short sentences, embedded clauses allow information to flow naturally, contributing to stronger, more complex sentence structures. And to help you remember, embedded clauses are typically introduced by relative pronouns such as which, that, and who, or by conjunctions like when, where, because, although, and if. Recognizing these words will help you spot embedded clauses quickly and also use them correctly in your own writing, which leads us nicely onto the last slide. So I think a writing assignment might be very useful here. So to help you practice using embedded clauses, you're going to produce a short paragraph about your favorite type of food. As you write, try to incorporate at least 2 embedded clauses. Think about the techniques that we have covered so far. So use embedded clauses to add extra information, added description, or added explanation. This will help your writing become more expressive and more structurally complex, which will help you when you're writing your assignments or essays in higher education. Okay, so thank you everybody for attending today. I hope the session was useful for you, and I hope to see you all again soon. Okay, bye-bye.